We have a quorum. Trying to count here.
Yeah, in person, we have Steve, Hannah, and Ellie. And for staff, Matt, Melinda, and myself. We also have, Matt, do you want to do an introduction of Bela?
Bela Stenke is here. Did I get the last name close enough? Bela was interning with us through UVM. She came to us a little bit by Megan, so she's going to be sticking around with us over the summer and doing a combination of helping with some town plan work and the absolutely most menial file sorting intern stuff that we can find for her, because who doesn't love that? She got to get her hands dirty in one of our old 1986 site plan approvals this morning, so and just along for the ride with lots of whatever's going on with planning over the summer, so we're happy to have her. Also, since we last met, and she's not on this meeting, but Hannah Hartman has started with us in the role of planning technician. She is also a recent, as in end of May, UVM graduate. We hired her a little while ago, had to wait for her to finish school, and now she's here, and we're really happy about that. And so you'll see a new face at the front counter, or you might interact with somebody different if you call in on the phone. So lots of stuff moving for the planning office as we roll into the summer.
That's great. You're all staffed up to write this lovely town plan.
Gosh, I hope that's what this means. Writing is hard. We can talk about that more later.
I think they have whole groups about that, Matt. All right. Let's go to the minutes real quick.
I made a couple of grammar adjustments, but nothing beyond that. And some like wording, there's some awkward wording, like thought fragments. No.
Shock.
Never. All right. Oh, go ahead, Chapin.
I had no corrections, so I'm happy to move that we adopt them as amended.
Do I have a second?
Hannah seconded.
Hannah, the owl is not playing nice with you, so apologize. All right, Hannah seconds. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right. They pass. Moving on. Going into the town plan draft chapters, and I asked Andrew for an assignment and then just failed to do it, which is pretty spectacular. Here. Oh, elections. Sorry. Let's start with elections. Skipped one. So I am very embarrassed to say I can't even remember what the original plan was. And is Megan there or Chapin? Can you remind me, is it 2 years, 1 year? And then of course, I also can't totally remember how long I've been a co-chair, which is also embarrassing. But Megan or Chapin, will you remind the commission about the original sort of concept around doing annual elections?
So I said Shay before me and then Megan, it had been sort of perpetual assignments. And so it was Megan and I who sort of instituted a rotation idea. And if Megan isn't on, my recollection is we said 2 years.
That was my basic recollection too, Chapin. I very much like the rotation concept and support that.
So it would mean that Ellie would become chair if it's been 2 years, and there would be another year if it hasn't.
Correct.
I believe it's only been 1 year.
It's only been 1 year.
Yeah.
I think In the policy documents, the election's supposed to happen annually.
Yeah,
And I think it was last summer when you opted, rather than having a chair and vice chair, have co-chairs, 2 co-chairs and 1 vice chair. So you could continue that model forward, if you choose. And you are 1 year into Jill and Shayla being co-chairs and Ellie being vice chair.
Are the
So,
existing officers willing to continue?
I'm more interested in going back into getting the memos and the separate emails and things during the week is tough for me, just I'm not at my computer as regularly as I think other folks are. But I'm happy to do it. I mean, I enjoy co-chairing with Shayla, so. But if somebody's eager, like Hannah, you want to step in, Steve, please, someone who hasn't been in a seat.
You want to, Steve?
I want you to have it. And
Or
I'm
if Ellie
serious.
wants to bump up and someone else move in, like I'm happy for anything.
Is Ellie there? Sorry, guys.
I'm here.
Okay, good. The owl is only really loving,
Wave your hands, maybe the owl will pick you
Yeah,
up.
it's stuck on Matt and
stuck on Matt.
Ellie.
not on the
Steve,
table
you see Steve.
near your voice, it should.
It's too hot. It's just not gonna cooperate.
Turn the owl.
I would be happy to stay on as a co-chair if folks wanted, but I would definitely want a co-chair. Because of the parenting side of my life. So there we go. Hi, Ellie. Hi. Okay.
Oh, waving helps.
There it goes.
I guess,
Um,
can you state, like, I don't know what I see what y'all do each week and you alternate between leading.
Disorienting, so sorry.
You alternate between leading and then there's the vice chair, but I'm still not 100% clear on what the exact roles of the chair are, other than what I have observed casually.
So sometimes before a bigger agenda item or a public hearing, we might do a little check-in. Usually that Monday or Tuesday, usually the Tuesday of a meeting. And we've done them in the morning, like 8:15, 8:30-ish for 15 to minutes to a half hour. And Matt and I will kind of brief you on the agenda item. And we have some general Q&A. Matt, if there's anything else you want to add.
Yeah, it's not something we've done for every meeting, but just like when we're aware that there's something that might be a little more complicated or there's a bunch of stuff to work through, we'll usually reach out to the co-chairs and the vice chair and say, hey, like, would it be worth it to you to do that, to kind of talk through, help you run the meeting, basically, and think about anything that might come up, or especially if we have also like a meeting that something controversial is coming up, there's gonna be a lot of members of the public there. The support we try to provide to the sort of the leadership of the commission is, hey, let's talk about how this is gonna go, make sure that we're ready to provide whatever the staff backup is that you need, answer any questions you might have, so you don't feel like you're going into it cold, that kind of thing. And I think we found that structure to be useful. The other thing is, I think the chairs do have, believe it or not, despite what it seems like coming from the staff, the chairs really decide sort of what you want the commission to be working on. I know it feels like we just tell you, hey, we're doing the town plan now, and sometimes we are subject to things that just have to happen, but definitely look to the chairs in terms of asking, what is it you're interested in having the commission work on, and thinking about what our whole upcoming year is gonna look like. It's gonna look like the town plan, but at least till this time next year. But there will be other stuff too, and so it's a chance to kind of talk through that, and yeah, so there's just a little more back and forth related to being a chair or vice chair. It's not, I mean, you folks who have done it can tell us I don't think we've even done one of those meetings in
Oh
a
wow.
month or two.
I think the last one we did was when we had that industrial ave zoning
Yeah,
thing. We did a little
Yeah.
check-in before that one.
And so the role during meetings is to facilitate like
Mhm.
the difference between when you are acting as chair and when a normal commission member is you facilitate and lead the conversation?
Mhm.
Okay, I know I just chime in when I have a thought, so, but I'm sure there's structure and rules.
Which is fine.
I wouldn't
too.
say Jill and I are ruling with iron fists here, so I
No.
think probably less noticeable than in other situations.
And for me, it's more the, if we get a email from Matt and it's a memo that needs to be read and it needs our electronic signature to get back to the select board, that's the kind of thing that I'm feeling like doesn't totally align with my schedule, and I think I should step out then if I can't do that.
And
Yeah.
the
Which
chair,
is also not a super frequent thing, but it does happen.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a
And
good
it's-
point, Jill. That's another thing we've done is just sometimes the town manager or another department will be looking for a letter of support that we know the planning commission would as a body support, but they're not meeting, they just met last night, Eric. I can't get them to sign a letter. And we'll do that with just signature by the chairs and then review it at the next meeting. So there's a little, again, a couple times a year, not that much of that. There's a little.
if I can add, if you are a chair or vice chair, it's good to have a basic familiarity with Robert Rules of Order and with our open meeting law in Vermont. And
Which just
those
changed.
materials, those materials are available to you.
Yep. Yeah, and Shay was right, open meeting law did change a little bit, although we're pretty much good with what we do now, so.
And another thing, so we're members of VLCT. I'm not sure if every board member or just the chairs and vice chairs got an email from Aaron. But definitely the chairs and vice chairs, Aaron can create a VLCT account for you. And you can access all their resources and open meeting law stuff. So if you got it, you should have gotten an email from her, definitely the chairs. I'm not sure if everybody got that email.
I did, yeah.
Jill, if you wanna step down, I'm open to learning the ropes, for it. If someone else is also interested in doing it, I will not die on this hill.
The tradition would be for Ellie to move into the co-chair, and then it would be the vice chair.
No,
I
go for it. I think that's great.
I don't, sure, I don't feel, if Jill wants to move out, doesn't wanna be doing something, we should find someone who also wants to, and so if you are more prepared to do that, that works for me.
Okay. Now, Emily, I'm gonna need your help. We're gonna call for the election of co-chairs and then a vice chair.
Correct, yeah.
All right. Is anybody else interested? I'm happy to keep doing it. I am enjoying it, but I do not need to, somebody else is very much wanting to do it. Don't wanna get in the way. Go ahead, Chapin.
To speed things along, I'm happy to make a single motion, which is I would nominate Ellie and Shayla to be co-chairs and Hannah to be vice chair for the coming year.
Right.
And I would happily second that.
Thank you, Steven.
Yep.
All right, and all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Right. Those opposed? Any abstentions? I want to vote for Ellie, so I'm not gonna abstain. I'm gonna vote aye. All right, and Hannah. Weird to vote for yourself. All right. Thank you so much, guys. And now we can go to chapters. And
Okay.
Chapin, thank you for the history on the concept of the two-year general term. All right. I'm gonna hand it over to you, Matt, with how you want to start.
All right, let's just go ahead and take them in order. I can talk through the start I've made on transportation and mobility. This is still pretty rough, pretty disorganized. But I am interested in a little bit of feedback from folks. First off, my introduction is about twice as many words as it should be, and I'd welcome some editing. There's a lot of three adjectives with commas in between them, stuff going on here. But what I really wanted to sort of talk with the group about a little bit is we're getting a lot of feedback, both through the manager's office and Public Works and the planning office, from folks who are really interested in seeing the town more fully and rapidly build out its bicycle pedestrian network. There's sort of a subgroup comprised of some energy committee members and folks who work on our mobility projects group, whose work ended up resulting in the official map. And they've been gathering and asked to have a meeting with myself and town manager Eric Wells to sort of talk about initiatives the town's taken up and what the town might take up around those issues. So that doesn't surprise me too much. We saw a lot of feedback in the engagement insights report and the roundtables, et cetera, about there being a lot of support for infrastructure, a lot of support for thinking about more steady and innovative funding mechanisms for that. And I'm pretty confident that if I don't have that in the brainstorm further down, that I can, articulate all of that further. I do want to note, while you're sitting on the transportation history part, that we're really not that far away from a point in time where the transportation story in Williston changed really fundamentally with the final announcement that the circumferential highway would not be built. And I was here for that. We were almost done writing the 2011 town plan, including its transportation chapter, which said soon there will be this highway. And it will take all these cars that are going through Taft Corners and it will route them on this other thing. And there will be an interchange at Mountain View Road, and there might be an interchange at Williston Road. And we're still thinking about whether in between those two is going to be a limited access highway or more like a boulevard, but it's definitely going to, it's going to fix all our congestion problems on Route 2A and up into Essex. It's going to fix the 5 corners. And then on this one day in 2011, there's this announcement, the circumferential highway is absolutely not happening. We actually had to put the brakes on the adoption process for the town plan and go in and rewrite the transportation chapter, which at that level essentially said, so this big giant infrastructure thing is that we've been planning on for 50 years is not going to happen. There's going to be other things that will happen in its place. We're not sure what those are yet. And there you go. So, in Williston's recent transportation history, we spent 2011, really through like almost 2014 in this circumferential highway alternatives process, working with the RPC and VTrans, figuring out what other improvements could be made to the system in Williston that could have similar congestion relief impacts. And so really the plan we're in right now, the plan that this new plan will be replacing, is the first one that fully acknowledged that infrastructure investment wasn't going to happen, that there were these alternative projects that would happen eventually. And here we are writing a plan that will start in 2025. And within Williston's borders today, essentially only one of those transportation improvement projects has actually happened. The improvement of the James Brown Drive intersection with Route 2A with the signal. Now, we have another one, which is the Mountain View Road Industrial Ave Route 2A intersection improvement that's coming relatively shortly. But again, I think the story has really changed. It's changed from there's this one big thing that's going to fix this one congestion issue to there's a bunch of little things, and they're going to happen over what's that?
That are not so little.
That are not so little, and
Apparently.
but that are also taking an incredibly long time to happen. Whether it's partnering with the state to build Trader Lane, the first Taft Corners Grid Street that you all sort of know about, or it's making that intersection improvement, or it's building bike lanes on Mountain View Road, or a multi-use path between the village and Taft Corners. Those projects are now spread out over this very lengthy time frame. Some of them not scheduled at all. there's a lot, I think, that this plan might say about how can the town accelerate the completion of those projects, make sure those are still the projects we want to do and go out and do them. There's also, I think, room to acknowledge that the town made quite a bit of progress on transportation, both during this last town plan period and over the last 20 years under the sidewalk bond, which was a loan the town took out over 20 years ago to fund grant match on various path and sidewalk and pedestrian bicycle improvement projects. So I do have a memo from our public works director listing all of those off and talking about some of the ones that they would like to take on, but that have more significant barriers, either you know, wetlands in the way, state highway in the way, difficult intersection to signalize, et cetera. And so I think it's just worth acknowledging that transportation has been a really kind of a changing story, actually not that long ago. So there's the big story of we got a highway exit in 1962. And there's another almost as big story that then we relied on the idea there would be this ring road, then it went away. We're still kind of feeling the aftershocks of that. And, you know, talking through, let me hang on with engagement insights for a second. I'll just talk about some of what we're hearing from folks who are really interested in this stuff is what's the next step? How do we make more things happen? How do we make them happen faster? The Mobility Projects Group did this great piece of work developing the official map. That gives us actually a really nice basis for a bicycle pedestrian audit and a sort of a mapping and ranking of what are the gaps in that system and what are some approaches this chapter could ultimately call for in filling those gaps. Do we start from a place like Central School and work our way out? There's a section I haven't written in this chapter yet about how great Safe Routes to Schools went this year and how many kids were getting going, walking and biking to school. And it really took off here in a way that Amy Brewer, the main person who organized it, said is not like a given. Like she's worked in other school districts where it said, let's do bike and walk to school day. And it's just not happened, or they haven't gotten a lot of participation, and Williston really responded to that. So does that give us some information about how to prioritize and build out our network? Another thing about input was that there were people who had a kind of a more negative response to a lot of this. They said, everybody's just going to drive anyway. Why work on this stuff? No one's going to bike in the winter. Everybody drives everywhere anyway. Might be worth thinking about if the plan is going to acknowledge that people said that. Do you just say, well, we're not listening to the people who said that, or we hear that, but we think the reason people aren't doing those things is because the infrastructure is not there. I think there's just some sort of soul searching for the group about that. Sorry, I'm looking at the did I highlight this, Emily, or did you highlight this?
I didn't highlight it, it was
I
highlighted.
must have highlighted this.
This might have come verbatim from our brainstorming section because
Yeah.
minor shout out to the two people who said trolley. It was definitely like work in progress thoughts that I.
Oh, I've left all of that
Okay.
in, so it's, like I said, it's rough, and it's all there. So we'll definitely, you know, we'll pull the official map in. I think we'll talk a lot about network and how to sort of focus the town's efforts in a way that scale with what the town can do, how to build that out. Chapin, I see his hand up.
Yes, I wanted to say when you had mentioned right at the start that so many people said they wanted more pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure, that as my group has been working on other chapters, whenever we get to the part about being livable and equitable, the rec paths, bike paths, access, say, to parks and open areas, and public transportation, those two things come up as the way to make other things more livable and equitable. So I just want to say in the weave of this, that comes through strongly into the transportation area.
That's really great. I think we can make sure that we acknowledge that in this chapter, that's starting to show up. And as I've thought through kind of what our process is gonna be as we get these rough drafts done and we start cycling back through them, I wanna find an organized way to start calling out those connections between chapters. It's the weave, but maybe it's just more of a spider web, I'm not sure. But, you know, sort of a call out box in this chapter might say, by the way, this helps make these other things more livable, resilient, and equitable. Or we might do some stuff with some symbology, the way we tag things in these chapters. The town plan related assignment that I've talked with Bela about taking on is, as these chapters get a little more refined, to really pull out the goals, the strategies, objectives and actions, and start collating them into the implementation chapter that will come at the end of all of these individual chapters, and start looking for overlap and sort of harmony between them. And I think that's a new thing we can do, is the implementation chapter doesn't just have to be a restatement of everything that's in the, you know, the 12 chapters before it, but it can synthesize it. And once we get that all in one place, we can do a big exercise a little later this summer as a planning commission about starting to prioritize those actions and think about putting them in order, so that everything the plan's calling to be done is most effective. So you're gonna see lots of connections and lots of overlap between all of these chapters, and we're gonna find a way to make sure that that is sort of celebrated and expressed in the plan, and then also kind of managed into something in the concluding chapter. So, I'm not sure there's a lot more like really earth-shattering stuff in here, but let's just look through it, right? Yeah, be able to move around Williston as a non-car, as a non-driver, all of Williston.
Miss the first, oh, that's just brainstorm.
That's brainstorm. I think we started to break it out, talking about, expanding infrastructure, and then some strategies under that about funding, because the two things about infrastructure is it's really complicated and it's really expensive. And because it's complicated, it's expensive. So funding is a huge piece of this. Yeah, continuing with microtransit, running a pilot. A lot of big question marks about working with Green Mountain Transit, what's gonna be most effective there. I see Jill's hand up.
The thing that we sat in with the select board, where the state was pitching us taking over that main route and adding trees and all of that, is that somewhere in here already? The idea that that would tie into our form-based code, and it would.
I don't know, it should be, Jill.
It
I
will
don't-
be, yeah.
I don't know that it is right now, but thinking about,
Because I feel like I'm for that. I know that it was like so expensive and a big idea for us to think about plowing and maintenance, but I think that's ultimately what we want to get to.
I think we covered in one of the other chapter, also in past 2-3 meetings, we talk about it. About the road thing.
We've talked about it, Mickey, for the village, so folding a master plan and expanding transportation, also thinking about class 1 town highway.
Yeah.
Here, in addition to 2 and 2A, which is different from that study, which just looked at tax corners area.
so, oh, go ahead, Chapin, I see your hand.
I wasn't gonna comment on that one because I agree. And actually on that one, let me just say, if you look at the investment that South Burlington made in Dorset Street about 20 years ago, it's very similar. And if you look at investment Burlington made in Church Street back in the 1970s, I think it was, to make it a pedestrian mall, that I think those kinds of long-term big projects need to get put in this kind of document, because they need to have early motion or they will never happen. But the reason I raised my hand was I wanted to just flag, I'm still the alternate for Green Mountain Transit representation for Williston. And our meeting this month was about dealing with the fiscal cliff that's coming. Basically, COVID money kept us going for the last few years without having to make changes, but the funding mechanism is not keeping up with the increase in costs. And there is planning now for reducing, not increasing, public transit in Chittenden County specifically. So there will be some cuts in a year from now and maybe more after that. In general, I expect the routes that have high ridership, like the number 1 from Burlington to Taft Corners, to be pretty immune to being cut. But the low ridership ones, like our route that goes to Essex Junction and Essex, might be at risk. So I just wanted to highlight that. And I don't expect Green Mountain Transit to be able to work with us on microtransit. And so as we think about filling the gap of the last mile for people who do ride transit and don't have cars, but then can't get the last mile to their home, or 2 miles or 3. As we think about that and about needs of people who don't have cars within the town, I think the pedestrian paths and some sort of local, basically public transit at the town level is probably in our long range, important to be in our long range goals. Thanks.
Yeah, Chapin, given some of the, recent news about what's likely to happen with Green Mountain Transit, that's a, there's a kind of a big change there. And, the town has a story arc around Green Mountain Transit that's really not that old either, which is that we got our growth center designation in 2006, and one of the conditions of approval was that we needed to join Green Mountain Transit. And I don't recall if we did it right after in 2007 or if we had to do it right before in 2005. Do you remember the year? I don't either. But we were not always a member of Green Mountain Transit. We had buses running in Williston, but we didn't pay in to the system the way a member community does. And that was, a decision the community made because it felt there was value in transit, and also it was really a requirement if we were going to do the kind of planning for the growth center that ensued after that, is that we would actively participate and fund making that growth center accessible by bus. So knowing that we are likely to see service cuts, also knowing that the one bus from Williston to Burlington is it the highest ridership line, Chapin?
It is. It's been number 1 for many years, and the number 2 route, which is number 2, is the one from Burlington to Essex Junction. Yeah, the one that runs on Route 2 is number 1, and the one that runs on Route 15 is number 2. It's really confusing. But yes, the Williston, and now of course a lot of that is South Burlington traffic on that route, but Williston is a strong participant in it, and I think we are a strong member of the Chittenden County organization. And so I don't see us wanting to separate, because that would sort of create other problems. But yes, I do think we're a strong member. We have the highest use route, and we have a pretty large say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I haven't written any of this, but I think there's probably an objective in here that says, continue to have as good transit in Williston as we can get. And then, or maybe that's the goal. And then there's a couple of objectives about what would it look like for Williston to be supporting that goal, and some strategies of what specifically could we do in our relationship with Green Mountain Transit to make it happen. One of those is somewhere in there is going to say, continue to be a member and continue to fund it.
And it's probably worth bringing people up to date on the fact that the board for Green Mountain Transit has felt that the funding mechanism was flawed for years and years. We felt that, which is we're depending on member towns to kick in money and assessing them. Basically Green Mountain Transit functions as a municipality with all the same taxation ability and so forth, except the towns can choose to be in it or not. But as you can imagine, if South Burlington were to drop out, what would happen to our route between Burlington and Williston? So it should be a regional authority, not a town by town participating, and funding should really be regional, at least regional. And in other states where counties have strong government, it's usually county funded. So there's been a lot of studies done of other ways to fund transit than having to assess towns one by one.
Yeah, I want to pause on that concept of things being regionalized for a minute, because I think as a state, we're running into that more and more. Vermont's towns and municipalities are trying to do some really sophisticated, complicated things on some incredibly tiny scales. Sometimes including planning and zoning, believe it or not, although I like my job, would rather not be consolidated out of it. And there is an element, a state required element to municipal comprehensive plans, that we acknowledge that there are neighboring communities that are, the world doesn't end at our borders. And as we've started working on all these chapters, I'm starting to think that rather than neighboring communities as a chapter, that's likely a call out in almost every one of these chapters that says, when we're talking about transportation, what does it mean that we're part of a region? What does it mean that we have neighboring towns that are rural? We have neighboring towns that are more urban, and we're part of this greater Burlington area, and we're on the I-89 corridor, et cetera. So I'm pretty sure that when we go and do the chart that will live at the front end of this plan that says, how does this plan meet all of the requirements of state law for comprehensive plans? When we get to the checkbox that says neighboring communities, I'd like to be able to say something like, you will find a tag in every one of these chapters talking about how its subject matter ties in to our geographic position in the region and the state. So I just wanted to mention that as we work on all these different chapters, I'm thinking that's going to be the best way to do that. Great.
Makes sense.
So today I just wanted to mention this, and I'm going to send Emily the image to see if she can put it up there. Those of you who worked through Taft Corner's form-based code will appreciate this. When we got talking about our official map and our grid streets, we held a meeting with V-Trans to talk about how those grid streets would interact with routes 2 and 2A. And they said, gosh, that's a lot of intersections. Have you guys thought about Class 1 town highway? So today, as we pulled out this site plan approval file from 1986, we found this letter from 1991 written to then town planner David Spitz from the Secretary of Vermont, of the Agency of Transportation. And I'll paraphrase, and you can just read the last paragraph or the last two paragraphs. But basically this says, if you guys want all these grid streets in this fancy downtown in the middle of our intersection of 2 state highways, you're gonna have to take them over. So to your point about exploring Class 1 town highway, the party line from V-Trans has been the same on this for 33 years now. If you want
Pretty
those state-
consistent for a state government. Just gonna give them a
It
shout out.
actually, it's remarkably consistent. I wish it was consistent in a different way. But I couldn't believe this letter popped out of there. With its fancy Vermont bicentennial watermark on it from 91. It's on the bottom.
Oh, yep, there we go.
Yeah, you see the little 1791 thing there, but so that to me is just an illustration of that the transportation chapter should probably talk about revisiting that Class 1 conversation and just say, if our vision is that those state highway corridors become walkable and bikeable and become something that's part of a grid of streets that surrounds the intersection, we're probably going to have to take them over. And I've said this a million times, it's a decision that comes with a price tag. And the question is it worth it? And how are our elected officials feeling about that? So something to think about.
I think one piece that weaves together those comments that we got, though, is that by taking on something like this, it both helps the folks that say we don't want to grow anymore and people are going to drive anyway, because the roads will be better and there'll be more roads you could choose to go around, or, you know, get past the place where people are coming from school at certain times. Like, it would help them, but then it would also create all these opportunities for people to do the other things that people want, the biking. So it's like, to me, this writing this in there when we have those comments, it's like, here's our solution in the long term, is this really big overhaul, this really big, you know, vision that we see that would be aesthetically pleasing. It would help all these folks on this side about wanting more paths, and then help all these folks on this side that want to keep driving their big cars. And it's all Williston.
I think we can say that. So the only other thing I wanted to touch on while we're all talking about transportation is I have all of these old town plans going back to the 1980s spread out on my desk right now, and I kind of look at them when I'm working on one of these chapters. And going back and from the 80s until the early 2000s, there's a little more discussion about truck routes and accommodating movements of industrial vehicles, you know, from Marshall Avenue and South Brownell Road and Industrial Avenue up onto the state highways and out to exit 12. And of course, you know, that's part of why our industrial zoning district exists, and part of why it is where it is because it has relatively convenient highway access. But there's a little bit of language in those old plans that I'm not sure is really quite on point, where talks a lot about like turning movements and making sure lanes are wide enough and things like that. And my observation has been that where the trucks have trouble is the intersections. You know, they get caught up when the intersections are tighter, you know, and they swing out into the bike lane and things like that. And I bring that up because when I work in what Public Works has had to say about the performance of the sidewalk bond over the last 20 years, one of the undone projects they call out is multi-use path alongside Marshall Avenue, from where it ends, you know, just after crossing the South Burlington line to South Brownell Road. So we have good multi-use path in our neighboring community of South Burlington, going out over through Tech Park. And we spent extra money, we in South Burlington both spent extra money replacing the culvert at where Marshall Avenue crosses and it turns into Williston. And there's the dead end of that multi-use path. It actually makes it over the brook now. Dead ends right there by that driveway that Emily's got up. And then as you proceed towards Taft Corners, Marshall Avenue loses that path. You can see Burlington Emergency Vet there at the top of the screen. We made them build their section when they built it, but it's just hovering there. And a little further down, there's another little orphan section in front of the tile store, right there. And then we go into what's called the Blueberry Swamp. And so the memo we have on this says, you know, we keep trying to get grants to do this multi-use path here, but we keep not getting them because wetlands, because we can't expand the width of this road because there's wetlands on both sides. And that may be true, that may warrant some further exploration. But the other thing is, these travel lanes and shoulders are quite wide. This road has a signpost, you know, it's a posted speed limit of 35 miles an hour. I think the lanes are 12 feet everywhere and somewhat wider in a few places. And this is one where, you know, the planning commission might think about, do you want to say something like, well, if we can't make this roadbed wider and we can't infringe on these wetlands at all, can we make the lanes narrower? Can we do that and still accommodate the trucks, you know, from UPS and FedEx and whatnot that need to come through here? Is there another way? The other way to do this is actually to give up on the Marshall Ave connection, leave that as, you know, maybe bike lanes, and make a connection on Shunpike Road instead. And that gets you over to Brownell.
We've gotten some segments there.
And we've gotten segments out of new developments across some of that. And I mean, there we deal with, not so much wetlands, but diverse ownership. A bunch of different landowners to work with and deal with, whereas we own the blueberry swamp. It's just the trouble is it's a swamp. So, you know, when I said it's complicated and expensive, this is just another example. But one where, I'm gonna send around the memo that Bruce put together about progress on the PED bond and some of the projects that haven't been done yet and why. And maybe circle back to the planning commission about, do we want to make any specific statements in this draft about those projects?
You've got a couple hands, Matt.
All right.
Chapin's first, yeah.
I was just gonna add to the discussion about Marshall Avenue and the Blueberry Swamp, that road was held up for decades. It was on our plans for a long time. It was held up for decades because it went through a wetland. And we had to basically find a way to get it permitted through the wetland. And I imagine there's the same difficulty for a rec path going along it, but it was done for the road, and what should be done for cars should be able to be done for pedestrians.
Go ahead, Jill.
Yeah, my question was, does the same rules apply? Like how, so if you make a path that's like asphalt next to a road, I can understand that. But I agree with Chapin that if you can do it for cars, you should do it for, but does it apply if you were to do like bridging? Like, you know, a bridge that's over the wetland that isn't then hampering the wetland. And I don't know if that's just like a cost thing, but are there rules around all that? Is it like, it's always no, or is there like?
So the short answer is, yeah, sometimes you might be allowed to put a bridge or a boardwalk somewhere that you wouldn't be allowed to just do fill and create a path. And yeah, it's way more expensive. Like, I forget, I don't remember the boardwalk stuff we've talked about
Yeah.
before, but it's
Expensive, and it's expensive to maintain.
and it's expensive to maintain, which is why we don't do more of it.
I think on that note, I'd wonder like, obviously it's kind of narrow-minded to say, oh, I've biked on that road so like numerous times, and of all of the roads we have in Williston, it is one of them that I like feel it is one of the least sketchy roads to bike
Yep.
on, and I guess I hesitate to like, just because we own the land doesn't mean we should solve this problem, because we don't have to have we don't have to go through the ownership battle. If like that's like, we don't need to solve it because it's quote easier. It's like, there are less people who will walk using that path, and like where are they walking to? It's like more people need to walk from the village to Taft's Corner. So like, you know, it's like we could address every single potential project, but like, we're not gonna be able to do everything because it is very expensive.
Mhm.
And so selecting the ones that we're most interested in, maybe we call out like you're saying, but you know, I don't know how much we wanna get into projects that like, we're not gonna prioritize.
And, you know, I mean, thinking about that, like arguably, maybe one of the reasons why it seems like not much progress or not enough progress has been made is that there seems to be this, in my opinion, this sort of scattershot approach, and like, you know, not the prioritization or the sort of systematic approach that is needed to get these projects done. And so we've got, you know, what, 10 projects, sidewalk or path projects going on that are stalled in some way or another.
Mhm.
And, you know, so I think prioritizing it.
Yeah, I'm hearing.
That
a
is
strong-
definitely, and I don't know, Matt, if we can do that when we get to that implementation chapter, if we need to do it before that, but I really want to do that. Melinda, I wanted to say like, this is the path, this is the multi-use path that we're going for in the next 5 years or 8 years or whatever we want, whatever the right timeline is for it. And here are the like 3 steps that we're taking. And like, that's the goal, like focus on that one. Cause I mean, I personally have like 6 paths that I want built, and that's not even remotely realistic. So I do really want to make sure we get to that where it is like this one. and we write congressional earmarks and we write grants and we go to, regional planning and we go to the state and we like try to actually get that one done.
Okay.
Mm.
I think there is time in our, before we have to get this plan adopted and capacity here for us to take on that kind of prioritization conversation as part of writing this plan. We may have to dedicate a meeting to it sort of toward the end of the summer to really do it well. And in the meantime, I'd like for folks to think about some of the themes of how you might prioritize, geographically. Where do the most people need something? Or where is it that we can take what's a kind of a complete network and expand it? Or is there a neighborhood over here that's just isolated right now, but if we build a section, we pull that whole neighborhood in? So those are some of the things I've been kind of starting to toss around, so that we could start from a conversation that says, here's a couple different approaches to how we think about all these projects. And then, here's what we're gonna do. And don't forget, coming into the next fiscal year, we're gonna be re-looking at the scope for the Village to Taft Corners path already, so that we're gonna be putting some more work into that one before this plan is adopted.
Right, and right, no, I think, other commission members speak up if you disagree with that. I think it's worth the energy because I do want us to be able to articulate that kind of thing in this plan, and this issue is very important and came up a ton in both the engagement and also, like you're saying, with these other groups that have been pushing for better infrastructure. And it does, like, I just want to acknowledge how much staff time it takes to even like think about doing one of them, let alone more than one. And I don't know that it's because we've thought about more than one, if that's why it's been hard to do. Obviously, they're just like hard and big and expensive, like you said, but if articulating and being clear about it and being clear about the steps would be helpful, I really would like to dedicate time to that. And again, please dissent if other members disagree with that.
I want to add that I just want to append to that the thought that pedestrian paths have not been treated the same as roads. They've not been prioritized the same way. Grants have not been written as much. Money has not been spent as much. In other words, if a road is needed, we've like Marshall Avenue through the Blueberry Patch, we did it. We find ways to put roads in that are needed. We don't find ways to put pedestrian paths in that are needed. And our traditional way was to get developers, when there's development along the road, to do a piece. And that's just not the same. That's not the way we do roads. And I don't want saying that this is our priority to imply that we don't think we can treat paths with the same priority we treat roads.
So, one thing I can draft for you all to consider might be a fairly, bold statement like that says, this plan states as a matter of policy that, gaps in the path system are unacceptable the same way they're unacceptable if there was a gap in the road system and the roads just didn't connect. We don't build half a road and stick a Jersey barrier at the end of it very often and say, oh, you gotta go drive in the grass now. The road's gone. And I can think about a way to articulate that, Chapin, that you all can chew on. In a meeting I had with some of the bike ped folks, a member of, or a staff person for Local Motion who works on policy matters noted that there was a neighboring community, and she didn't tell me which one, that was working on their comprehensive plan and made a similarly bold statement that their plan would not call for increasing the capacity of the road system. In other words, we would just say we're not going to do anything to move cars faster or more cars per hour on our roads anymore. And I assume it said, and instead we're going to do, other things. And my response to that was like, I'm not sure Williston's ready to say that. Cause That might have been, Huntington saying that, I don't know. Where the road traffic situation was really different, but.
And,
thinking
and we
about-
want all those connectivity streets, and
Well, right, so more so looking at streets as multimodal, and that a fine grained grid of streets, even that cars can drive on, is still like a really good thing. So anyway, just thinking about that, there are communities that are willing to kind of chuck something pretty bold out there and put it in their plan, and obviously. In the fall, we've got to go to the select board with this verbiage and say, is this something you're willing to, sign up for and to adopt into your town plan, and have those conversations over the winter, but something to think about. I feel like I've taken up a lot of time on transportation.
It's a big one, though.
I think it's a big
Yeah,
one.
any closing transportation comments? All right.
All right, so I'm up next. I'm working on facilities and utilities. I've made some headway on the utilities component, so thinking about things that exist in Williston but are not Williston, like our power service comes from Green Mountain Power or Vermont Electric Co-op. The Velco transmission lines run through Taft Corners. Gas is provided in some parts of town by Vermont Gas. Our solid waste management, you either bring it to the dump or pay for a subscription service to have it picked up. It's managed by CSWD, so they are a municipal entity that exists in Williston. They have a host town agreement. And ultimately they transfer waste, either recycling, who knows where it goes, trash goes to the landfill in Coventry. And then we have water coming from Lake Champlain through Champlain Water District. They provide the water. Williston maintains the distribution system through water lines. Sewer service, I have not talked about in this chapter yet, is gonna be a big component. So we have sewer through the Tri-Town agreement at the Essex plant. The goals around that system are gonna be, maintain good data on usage, manage what you have well, and efficiently to meet your town plan goals, but then also think about how can you expand, sewer capacity either at that plant or elsewhere to support, not only the growth in Williston, but, the other two members of the Tri-Town agreement. So in terms of what the town plan chapter is gonna look like, recognizing that these entities have their own master plans, they're regulated, most of them are regulated by the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission. And a lot of the goals are gonna be about keeping tabs on what they're doing, providing data to them, providing comment to them, and monitoring what their activities are gonna be. For example, I'm not sure if it's the life of this plan or by 2048, but the transmission lines in Taft Corners are gonna be redone. So that's gonna have an impact on the area for a little bit, but that easement is always gonna be there forever, impacting how Taft Corners builds out.
Emily, can you bury that kind of line or never? Cause it's too.
I don't know. A great planner once said everything's possible with enough time and money. I'm not sure if transmission lines could be. Matt might have a better
Yeah.
idea.
so.
I
we did-
can say you can, yeah.
Yeah, we have talked about, I think, at minimum, Williston should participate in whatever process exists around that eventual Velco reworking in a way that reflects the town's interests. So, as Emily mentioned, the presence of the line through Taft Corners Growth Center, it just cuts a swath through
Yeah.
everything. It impacts a lot of things. We did actually talk to Velco in the beginning of drafting the form-based code of have you guys ever thought of relocating that line maybe to the Cirque right of way, and not having it go right through Taft Corners, and the answer was probably not. But I think the same thing about, you know, whether you advocate for underground, or you might advocate for, a configuration where more use can happen underneath the lines, because right now you really, they don't even like to have like a public park under the lines. They're okay with parking lots and trees that grow no taller than 12 feet, and that's really it under those lines. And so it really does shape the built environment, significantly in, Taft Corners.
So this is ECI's webpage. Apparently in 2008, they did underground transmission lines in Charlotte, Shelburne, and South Burlington. So it is possible.
I mean, cause either way, I mean, it would be great if they're underground, just cause wow, would it look nicer? But the other thing is, I mean, just talking about rec paths. You know, could we get them to do something there so that people could use that?
I can make an observation here from the work I've done with telecom companies and some power companies, that as weather becomes increasingly an issue, especially when you start talking about things like wind load and ice load, there is some significantly higher degree of talking about the need to bury a lot of utilities across the country. Because, you know, if the ice load starts to increase on those wires, or if the wind load starts to go up, the danger of a line coming down in the middle of a highly populated area like Taft Corners is something that weighs heavily on the minds of utility companies. So it could in fact work in our favor. You know, the bad weather could work in our favor to incent them to do something.
Silver linings of climate change. No, but that, I do, that, I mean, it would be so much nicer if it weren't.
Yeah, so I can get that in here to encourage underground transmission lines, as well as strategic underground placement of distribution lines. So that's something that's talked about, would underground utility lines in the village. And there's a difference. The transmission is going regionally. The distribution is what connects to homes and businesses. So they're both electricity, but they're different amounts of it and going different places.
Green Mountain Power has an ambitious program happening already to bury lines in high-risk areas. They're basically trying to, and also installing Tesla power walls. They're trying to say everybody should be able to be free of power outages.
Yeah, so that's pretty much where the utilities component of the plan is going. The facilities section, which is not written, is gonna focus more on. And I really liked what Melinda said, going from scattershot to prioritization. So what are the buildings and lands that the town owns? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? Where can investment enhance them? And then prioritizing them, because like paths, there's gonna be a finite amount of money and staff capacity for those projects, and making really strategic investments. This was all echoed by the Historic and Design Advisory Committee. So one of their examples is the Brennan Barn in Brennan Woods. It was required to be preserved as part of Act 250. It's on the town parkland. It's not really being used for anything. So could that be restored and be, if we need park pavilion space that people can rent, how can that be better utilized? So thinking about, what are all these things that we own, from town hall to the fire station, the public works garage to the old schoolhouse. And then thinking about them more comprehensively and prioritizing them.
Definitely. And I did want to mention, Emily talked a little bit about sewer and sewer allocation. And there is a section in the land use chapter that talks about make sure that we align how we manage our sewer capacity with our land use goals. Because most uses of land that are really big or significant are going to need to be supported by the town's allocation of sewer capacity. And there are some real challenges with the current ordinance and the way that allocation is done. You've watched me do attachment A to the sewer allocation ordinance every year here. There are also likely to be some region-wide land use goals, and coming out of recently passed law, just Monday. Ultimately, some housing targets that the regions of the state and the individual municipalities within the region will be expected to meet. And they're likely to be big. And they're likely to be only feasible if they're built in places that are served by water and sewer. And so there's quite a bit to think through in that sentiment of make sure the land use goals are supported by the way we manage the provision of all of these utilities. And, you know, of them, you need more power, you build a bigger power line. There are some issues, especially when more people put up solar panels and you start needing power lines that are more two-way. You need more water. The distribution system's great. We might need another water tower eventually, just to have the amount of reserve capacity we're supposed to have. You need transportation capacity. There are infrastructural ways of dealing with that. And obviously what we just talked about is a lot of trying to focus people on mode shift. You need more sewer treatment capacity. There's a factory essentially that you need to build to do that. And there are national level permitting thresholds that needs to operate under. So if you think expansion might happen, that's one thing. If you've got some things you want to achieve that are related to the creation of new land uses in your town, and you only have so much of that one resource to spend, you might start thinking about budgeting it more carefully or more in a more targeted way than the year-to-year system we've been using through the attachment A process. So I don't know, Emily, I may help you with
There's more to come in this chapter for sure.
something about basically just revising the way that ordinance and the way the allocation system works so that it's more attuned to the long-range goals of the town.
Mhm.
The other ones are just, I think, less concerning than that particular one.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yes.
I really want that to be in there, please.
Okay,
Do you want to explain, so what was Brian Courier running into where he needed something from Bruce, but the ordinance made it?
so real quick, just because of the way we plan to serve new development with sewer, keep in mind that even though you get a permit from Williston and you get a permit from Bruce to connect to Williston sewer, you also have to go get a state wastewater permit because we have this double layered system in Vermont. There's been several attempts at the legislature to undo that and say, look, if the municipality is managing access to the sewer resource, why are we making these people get a state wastewater permit? But they do. And the easiest way for us to say, yes, this person can connect to sewer is if they've actually come in and purchased the capacity. But that's really expensive and people don't generally want to do that until they're pretty much ready to build. What we have instead often is someone will get a whole subdivision approved. And we're able to say, yeah, this subdivision has been approved. We have planned to be able to sell it the capacity it needs as it builds out. We are paying attention to that. We have this yearly sewer budgeting exercise through attachment A. We're doing all of that. It's gonna be fine. We've planned for this. And that letter, when we write it that way, anything short of saying we've already sold them the capacity is not always successful in that developer getting their state wastewater permit. The state's saying, well, you don't really have it yet. And they're like, well, yeah, but I'm gonna have to spend $17 a gallon or whatever we're at now, to buy the capacity. And I'm not ready to build, but before I go and build my subdivision roads, I'd sure like to know that I have a wastewater permit and that, I'm gonna be ready to go next construction season. So this goes back to housing production, it goes back to delay, it goes back to things that miss a whole cycle because there's a permit out of sequence. So thinking about not just the way we decide how we're gonna spend our limited resource, but also how we're gonna manage the assignment of it to new development in a way that deals with some of those permitting realities.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's another hang up. I saw Mickey's hand up for a minute there. I don't know.
Yeah, I was thinking though, if you think that these are going to be like costly and going to be like long-term in nature, should we also spell it out and say we should start putting some fund or reserve every year so that when the thing come, you have ready to go? Because it's incremental, right? We're going to approach those limit over time. It probably might take 5 years or 10 years, or I don't know, whatever it is, but should we start planning about it so that when the time comes, we don't have to be scramble like what we do all the time?
Yes,
Mhm.
I think we need to do all of that, both plan for the eventual, tightening of the market, of what's we have available to sell. And also plan for what are the viable pathways to expanding, that capacity. We do have an impression that the Regional Planning Commission is gonna be taking up a region-wide sewer and sewer capacity study coming up in the next year, so we may be able to reference that and cite to it. But that's definitely part of the picture too, is, that plant that we're part of in Essex serves the city of Essex Junction and the town of Essex Junction, and they have their own designs, and ultimately they're gonna have their own pieces of that region-wide housing target to fit within the same limited resource. I see Chapin's hand up.
You mentioned it in the introduction, Emily, about the fact that the state only has one landfill. And I don't know what we can put in here about that, but it's when we talk about sewerage capacity, which we could build another plant, we can't build another landfill. And we already have a capped landfill in Williston. I don't know if we want to put anything in here. It worries me in the same way that the nuclear power plants didn't have a waste site, and so they are all now storing it in casks on site at each one. Are we going to be storing garbage in some kind of thing in each town? To me, it's not a town problem, but we should at least say something about what our vision is for how to solve that problem.
Right, so CSWD theoretically could put another landfill at the Redmond Road site. Matt, you probably know that history better than I do.
Yeah, I mean, the reason CSWD exists down at the end of Redmond Road was because there was a former landfill there that they purchased, and then they took a bunch of land owned by Heinsberg Sand and Gravel by eminent domain over the course of about a 25-year lawsuit. And the reason to do all of that was because that site does have potential to be used as a landfill, although that has not been their stated plan for that site for a very, very long time. And you can imagine it's very controversial, when it was proposed. I do think, to Chapin's point, if we can do a little research on what the state of Vermont sees the status of the Coventry landfill as and its projected lifespan, and sort of at least just talk about that, our trash goes to this one landfill, it can only get so big. It has an end date somewhere in the future, it has to, and then something else will have to happen, and then maybe taking it back local is just to talk about waste, removing every single thing from the waste stream that goes to that landfill that you possibly can, and that's kind of the thing, when you talk to CSWD about why they're so assertive about recycling, and composting and all of those things. It's not just that they're good things to do and we shouldn't throw perfectly good stuff away in the trash that can be turned into other stuff. It's that it's incredibly expensive to put things in the landfill, and it's cost containment. You need to put as little stuff in that landfill as you possibly can. So even if you're taking glass soda bottles and you're not melting them down and turning them into new bottles, that's not what they do. They grind it up into aggregate and use it the same way you would use gravel, but that is way better than that stuff taking up space in the landfill, that could otherwise be taken up by stuff that absolutely has to be in the landfill. So there's probably you know, a strategy in here about what can the town do to support the effort CSWD is making to keep every possible thing they can out of that waste stream. You know, whether it's like what we do with Green Up Day or how we manage the stuff we consume as an institution around, you know, like we don't do a lot of disposable stuff. Sustainable Williston has a library of silverware for events that you can check out and use instead of buying plastic spoons. You know, there's all these, like, down to the very micro to like the public information campaign stuff to, you know, but let's also try to maybe understand, like, yeah, this article Emily's got up about the landfill itself.
Yeah, so we can include some of this information and part of my framing for utilities is, you know, this isn't our domain, but being able to point people in the right direction. Like a lot of times citizens will come in and are like, well, what about, you know, statewide transmission planning and how is Green Mountain Power handling two-way with solar? And being able to direct people in the right direction on this
Mhm.
information. But maybe the landfill would go more centrally in Vermont, so it's.
Yeah, that's
For
for too.
Yeah, we used to have
It could be
that.
more
We used to have
equitable
that.
to southern Vermont.
Yeah, then
if
they
it's-
made it cap it.
If it's even south of us,
Yeah,
like
Yeah.
Coventry's at the very northern end of the state, so everybody south is driving all the way up.
mhm.
Yeah, I remember when that Moortown landfill closed, it was a big deal up in Lamoille County because they were worried about all this traffic that was gonna come through
Yeah,
going to Coventry, so.
yeah.
Let's at least talk about what individual people and businesses can do with composting and recycling as a strategy for this utility of trash disposal.
And Casella did just announce, I think they are gonna do compost pickup in Williston,
Oh,
which is cool. I mean,
yeah.
for those of us with chickens, it's not necessary. We could also just expand the access to chickens, but you could also do that if you're not into composting yourself. And especially like obviously for folks who are living in Tufts Corners, composting is not always possible. So that's pretty great for doing that. All right, I just want to note the time. Not that I
Yeah, I
want to
think
get
I have
to
something.
our group since again, I didn't do my homework, but
Moving on. Okay.
I think any final comments before we keep going?
Emily or Melinda, do you mind screen sharing? I'm just not on my work computer.
Oh, for sure.
Thank you. So I do not have a whole lot to say tonight. Like Shayla was implying there, Yellow Team, we haven't done quite as much, but we do have some, largely thanks to Chapin for some of his thoughts. I guess Chapin, if you want to just talk.
I do want to, Chapin has most of the thoughts, but I did do enough homework to know what the public engagement said about this.
That's
So just
awesome.
to refresh, even though it's not written here, refresh people's minds. There was a lot of interest in preservation of farmland. And really making sure that we're protecting forests and meadows. So that was like a very clear, like, call out in the online participation. And then that whole, I don't know if folks remember, and if they have their nice little public engagement packet, it's on page 30 of that. But there is also just a lot of support for conserving undeveloped land, even if it resulted in increased taxes, or a lot more than I thought there would be, with 24% strongly agreeing and 36% agreeing. So that's a total of 60% in that, like, really pushing for that. And then with that said, I wanted to just note one thing that Chapin has brought up, which is that just the haying fields, or the sort of a lot of the open farming, which is haying in Williston, isn't necessarily the best thing for the environment. And so trying to balance this wish and desire of Williston residents to keep that land open with what does keep it resilient is going to be a little tricky, because a lot of that open farmland is no longer sort of actively farmed with animals on it. But now I'll hand it over to you, Chapin.
I agree with everything you said. What I think I'd like to explain that I was giving this thought and it made me question my own values. I grew up on a farm. I grew up next to farmland. I have been a farmer of sorts, a sugar maker, and I own some open land in another town in Chittenden County. And so I value open land so much. And then I was thinking about sustainability and resilience. And what's happening is the industry that caused those lands to be open, primarily dairy in the last 100 years, has been fading down to where we have only one farm still milking in Williston, a couple doing beef. And so the reason why the fields are there is going away. And when the pastures are abandoned, our invasive species tend to come in. And when we when we mow them to allow for bobolinks and other nesting birds, late in the season, we are in fact encouraging poison parsnip and spotted knapweed and other invasive herbaceous plants. And the borders of these fields come in with buckthorn and invasive honeysuckle. So in fact, our open spaces are what I would call working landscape is not sustainable. And this was challenging my own, aesthetic desires. And so it was a real sort of important realization that we're fighting a battle. And then the other is historically, those lands have not been open. We were covered with an ice sheet for most of the last million years. And then that ice sheet melted about 14,000 years ago. And then there was Lake Vermont. Most of Williston was underwater. And then there was the Champlain Sea, which was down at the level of Taft Corners. And so half of Williston was out of the water. And it wasn't until about 10,500 years ago, or 11,000 years ago, that this land was vegetated. And it didn't take long for it to be vegetated primarily with forests, first conifer and then later mostly beech, believe it or not, which we know from cores of pollen analysis from the bottom of lakes and ponds. So if you think about preserving the landscape, the idea of preserving open land is trying to preserve what historically happened on this land between the early 1800s and the mid 1900s, when it was farmed first for sheep and then for dairy. And so it's kind of a stretch to say that that's the most important thing. And yet it's valued by people. And so I feel like we just need to take that into consideration as we look at trying to meet this goal that a lot of people would like us to keep open spaces. So you'll see further down what I put in was much more about educating people and ourselves having a program to control invasives in these areas and to have more sustainable practices. And I didn't get into it here, but for instance, we should not be mowing wetlands, even if they were traditionally mowed for haying. If the haying is no longer happening, we shouldn't be mowing them, etc. So this was a discovery process for me. I made a 90-degree turn in the middle of thinking it through.
Thank you, Chapin. I have a couple more notes. If whoever's doing the computer wizardry wants to scroll back up. So at the top, I had added kind of a definition of working landscapes. That's actually from the previous town plan, almost verbatim. I think identifying what we're talking about is important. Chapin had also mentioned some aerial photos. We've been using these with the Conservation Commission as well, and I think they're really effective. If you see what some land looked like back in 1940 in Williston, it doesn't look like what it looks like right now. So I think that's great. For livable, resilient, and equitable, I have a couple of Well, I have one question that's related to this, and it's related to farmers housing, um, farm worker housing. It's a topic that we discussed a bit with our group in light of some recent events in town. And I think that a question that I haven't really honed in on, but eventually I think that might be good for discussion is what kind of policy would be good for being supportive of farm worker housing in Williston. And so as we're looking at making it more livable and equitable, that's a question that I have for the planning commission. If you keep scrolling, let's see. I guess this is also related to our equitable, resilient, and livable question is about community spaces and gathering spaces for the community and what kind of uses are associated with that. And then what kind of events and kind of questions we have as far as land use goes for neighboring properties and respecting things like noise ordinances and so on. And so another kind of question is, as farms are diversifying, maybe moving more into events and such, what do we want to allow related to that, and what's the right amount of the right level of use, I should say. So that's another question. Our group identified those community spaces as being really important. And I think that we saw that in the public engagement as well. And that certainly applies out in our more rural parts of town as well. I think that's most of what I have. If you just scroll down a little bit more. Yeah, I think we can leave it there for now. I think the one other really important thing here is talking to landowners. I know that I've heard stories from other towns about the town's planning commission or DRB kind of making a ruling or setting a goal, and then the landowners come in and say, hold on, we don't really agree. And so I think that would be an important follow-up for us as well.
And Andrew already said this a little bit, but again, going back to that, like, how do we encourage more local food production and access to community gardening and other like engagement of people who don't necessarily live in the rural part of Williston with that rural landscape, given that it's not all dairy farming, anymore. So. Also, as somebody who has sheep and just lost two to a coyote, I can say it is more and more challenging with, where the different predators are coming from and to and going.
East.
Right. I like that responsible growth has turned into smart growth.
I changed the title, I hope you don't mind.
I think that's good.
I just like got it.
Guys.
A light bulb came on. I'm like, oh, okay. I don't know.
No, go for it.
Okay. All right, so, this is the chapter about housing and, so if you want to scroll down, to the history. So in starting to think about this chapter, I went back and I kind of looked at some of the previous town plans that I wanted to get a sense of. Because it seems like, over the course of the town's history, there has been this like. Two-pronged approach to this chapter, which is, you know, the goals of. Not too much growth. But we also need to, provide our fair share of housing in town. For the, you know, for the region as a whole, and so just kind of wondering like, what's the history of this? Kind of these goals that are in tension with each other. And, so I looked at the 1990 plan, or well, first of all, 1982 plan. Already notes the shortage of housing, and that it's expensive. And at that time, the town was had established a municipal water system, was establishing a wastewater system. And then, you know, the 82 plan contemplated that, well, if we establish this wastewater system, there's gonna be a lot more commercial and residential development. So there was that acknowledgement, and then when you go to the 1990 plan, it's, keep going. Yeah, keep going. Okay, there's sort of like there is sort of this two-pronged approach, but it's much more, what's much more emphasized is this goal of meeting Williston's fair share of housing in the region, and to provide affordable, you know, a housing that's affordable to all income levels. And they did this analysis that, where they thought, you know, future housing development could adequately meet the town's needs, at least through 1995. There was it just seemed like, things were on a much more stable plane. And so, there's that, and then during the 90s, we see the development of a lot of big developments in town, Southbridge, Brennan Woods, Pleasant Acres, others, and there was an increase of, an annual increase of 6.2%, which was higher than the previous 2 decades. And, also Williston was taking on a much larger share of the county's, growth of housing, 17%, which was much larger than the decades preceding it or the decades coming after it. So there was a lot going on. And the 2000 plan then makes a statement that excessive growth is straining the ability of the town to provide services and facilities. We've got to focus, you know, and has also, created this sort of intangible impact, on the quality of life in the town. People aren't recognizing you know, you see a lot of new people in town, a lot of new spaces. There's a feeling like, there's no longer easy access to recreational, paths and trails, and so forth. So then the emphasis is much more on managing growth. And it kind of stays that way until the present day. And, that's when that's sort of the origin of the 80 dwelling unit per year. You know, that's where that comes from. It's the 2000 plan. We should limit, we should limit development to 80 units per year. And that policy still applies today, sort of. You know, we're changing, but slowly, yeah, slowly. And so what that did was, you know, while the town still prioritized affordable housing in that system, it had the unintentional result in clamping down on housing production. And so you have this limited supply, raised prices, same thing that's been happening all over the place, really. And so, now, you know, we're sort of in this housing crisis, and, you know, I think I've gone through, I went through a lot of this stuff before. I think I remember from a previous meeting that, kind of talked about this. And, so we don't need to go through it again, but, so basically, you know, just kind of listed the things that that have been done to date to try to address housing needs, and then the regional, then I add a section just talking more about regional trends and the Building Homes Together campaign, that was launched in 2020 and 2016. And, you know, basically how since this campaign started, the indicators of housing shortage have worsened, and the numbers, the targets that have been set in Building Homes Together are not gonna cut it, in terms of meeting the housing challenges. And then just talk a little bit about, if you scroll down, a little bit about the Home Act, and only now we have to add the Be Home Act, which just was, you know, passed the other day, yesterday,
Yeah,
or
Monday.
veto or whatever. And then just talking about what Williston, how Williston's bylaw has changed to comply with the Home Act. I don't know if I really need to get in as much details that, but whatever, it's there. And then what do we hear for during public engagement? We heard we need more affordable housing. I mean, pretty universally, like more affordable housing, more greater diversity of housing, small homes, you know, housing for workers, mismatch between housing and between the type of housing and household sizes. And then scroll down a little bit. Yeah, so then there seemed to, although there was a lot of voice supportive housing, there wasn't in the survey that the online survey, there was not support for paying for that support of affordable housing through higher taxes. So that's kind of the main difference between, you know, conservation of land and, you know, a lot of support for paths and trails. And even funding that, but not much support for funding affordable housing. And then just this sort of vision and livable, equitable resilience piece, just kind of you know, noting that like over time, if you scroll up just a little bit, because I sort of forgot. All right, good. Yeah, just sort of reiterating that, that this policy of clamping down on new residential development has resulted in a shortage of housing with resulting affordability challenges, and yeah, so and also note that the towns had a policy to concentrate growth in tap corners. Well, that could have equity impacts, because we gotta make sure that, you know, if we're gonna have a lot of people living in tap corners, that there's gotta be green space in there too, that people can enjoy, and also there's gotta be good access to open space in other parts of town, and, you know, a more equitable distribution of that open space. Also, you know, people, there have been people that are kind of upset with increasing taxes, and, you know, so there's a tension between wanting to provide better services, and needing to fund that with something, with taxes. And so how do we do that, you know, and do it in an equitable manner? So anyway, that's kind of, and then I've listed like a bunch of goals and objectives and strategies under there. Basically, you know, the first one sort of tips like the traditional goal of managing growth to align with the town's ability to provide services. This says the town of Williston will manage the provision of public facilities and services to meet the demands of projected commercial and residential growth. You know, and then it says something in there about the sewer allocation ordinance. Reevaluate the way it's done, make sure it supports the town development priorities. Within current capacity constraints, and then. Looking at possible other ways to expand sewer capacity. And then there's just, I don't know, there's kind of a bunch of strategies around. Increasing and supporting affordable housing, including like a lot of things that the housing committee could do, or could work on. And I don't know. That's pretty much it.
It's an incredible amount of work. So thank you. I know it's based on all the other housing work you all have done this year. So, so nice to have all of that for this plan. I just want to say, like, in addition to all the public engagement, just having that housing report, to back this stuff up is awesome. I did want to ask Melinda about the disability group. And I don't know if there was, I didn't see a specific thing there, and if that's too granular, and if we want to leave it to the housing committee to kind of talk about that. But I feel pretty strongly they've been really engaged and have been really pushing, and want to honor that commitment.
Yeah. Yeah, that definitely is a good point, and. You know, I think we can add an objective in there to provide service supported housing, and, you know, kind of work with DEHI to do that.
Yeah, work with DHI and Champlain Housing Trust, you know, to I don't know exactly how to word it, to consider projects that would allow people living with disabilities to stay in Williston. Yeah, I mean, that's my biggest thing.
Mhm.
We are, I think, this is like one of the ones where do you think we will have to figure out how to prioritize some of this, because it's a lot. And it's awesome, and I want it all, but I think we should kind of try to figure out how to, it's gonna be hard to prioritize this one, I think, or it would be hard for me.
I printed this one out and have reread it, and I still need to reread it more times before I can give coherent input. Melinda, because you've been so comprehensive, it's really good work, and thank you.
And the rest of the team too.
And the rest of the team. Thank you all.
I think we should just say they're cheating because they have that whole report.
Well,
No,
yeah.
I'm teasing. It's awesome. But I do think the priority, and I don't know, I can't remember, Matt, where we landed on how to do that in each chapter, but yeah, it would be a challenge for me to prioritize this one. And I do think we should in some way, so that both the housing committee, the select board, everybody can kind of like get on the same page with a couple of these to make sure that they really happen.
Yeah,
Mm.
I think some prioritization at the end of each of these chapters, and then sort of a grand or more integrated prioritization at the end, and especially looking for, are there things, you know, that we might do around town facilities or around land use that are also housing supportive, like, you know, thinking about, one of the things we've talked about around our, like, the most affordable or most vulnerable populations is, can you find a piece of land to
Yeah.
get into the hands of the people who really need to build housing that's gonna be expensive and complicated to build?
Mm.
You know, towns are big enough entities that sometimes they have a piece of land. I don't know that we do, but that might also serve other purposes as well. So yes, prioritization both within the chapter and then at the end, and especially looking for synergy at that point, there may be something that hits. a housing goal and a transportation goal and a, open space goal, for example, and you go, oh, wow, if we really, you know, or there's a project around those things, and if we give that a project a name and we give it a lifespan across the 8-year schedule of this town plan, we could really do something. And, you know, around these bigger, more expensive, more complicated things, the other thing I want to emphasize is having a town plan that actually lays that out in a bit of a timeline is really helpful. I can't tell you the number of times someone asks me, hey, Matt, I just saw this grant come around. Wouldn't that work for such and such project? And I go, oh yeah, but there's a prerequisite and there's a thing we were supposed to do 6 months ago in order for our application to be considered, and we're out of luck until next time. And gaining the capacity and sophistication to know everything that's gotta happen if you're targeting a funding cycle or a permitting cycle. I mean, we're really going out there and doing stuff that, certainly in the planning office has just not been done before. You know, I mean, planning offices, planning departments in Vermont are doing well if they're keeping their heads above water with what's happening at the DRB. And the permits and the neighbor disputes and all of that, and, we need to be really, really organized, to make progress on these things, and I think we can. But, yeah, the more we can do it in the plan, the better.
Remind me, I apologize. Can you remind me the name of our new intern who's here?
Bela,
Bela. I think you can start with that, right? Now we've got Bela. You can Bela on the chat.
I guess along that note, it's like, it would be awesome if we could figure out like what effort is required to get on board with like what kind of grants are coming up. Like I was after a conversation a couple meetings ago, where like something about geothermal. It's like, oh, there was a grant like a couple years ago, and actually Heinsberg, like a project in Heinsberg, got money from it for a community geothermal project from like a National Department of Energy grant. And it's like you gotta stay on top. Like I was in a research field previously, if you stay on top of it, like there's a lot going on, and like grant writing itself is an art and sounds very painful, but like I think we're gonna need to tune in that practice for some of these things, like you're saying, they're really big.
so if you look at, I think it's in the comprehensive plan folder somewhere, we don't have to look at it right now, but some of the planning commission members might remember, we have this sort of multicolored text table, where we were tracking progress on the goals of the 2016 town plan. And we had color code for, in progress, not started yet, completed, or not the responsibility of the planning department, because it was a departmental document. And we also had like next step, and when are we trying to get the next step done by, and when's like a completion date. And we had taken every single action out of the implementation table for the 2016 plan, as well as the energy plan, and put it on that. And I would envision doing something like that, at the conclusion of the implementation chapter of this plan, add a column for likely funding source, timeline. Like when,
What you
where,
need to
how,
know,
what do
yeah.
you know, what do you need to do? Like, there's one grant every year that, is for people or for municipalities outside of Chittenden County, except municipalities in Chittenden County that have done a similar planning process to the one that's only available outside of Chittenden County. And every year you have to call the downtown board staff and go, I think we qualify, can you confirm? And then they say yes, but it takes like a month. And then you write the grant, and then you don't get it, because we're seen as being a wealthy town that doesn't need grant money on that in that program. Sometimes we do get it. Then we get to do grant reporting. If you think grant writing is hard,
Grant reporting is a pain.
grant reporting is the worst.
Grant writing.
Tracking match funds is awful.
It's fun.
But yeah, so, you know, being organized is how we create capacity to do that stuff. And the more of it we can do up front in the plan, the better. And it doesn't mean, I mean, we'll go off schedule the day the plan is adopted, but that's okay, because it'll be there. And it'll be something to work on. No, I mean, come on.
That's true, yeah.
We know
You're
us,
just being
like-
realistic. That's okay.
All right. Well, again, thank you everybody for all of the work, and I guess that's it for the night. With a motion to adjourn.
Is the
Yep.
office open tomorrow?
Yep.
15th, or no? It is open.
We are open.
Unfortunately.
I'll motion to adjourn, or if someone else already has, I'll second.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.